Coming up, it's the International Week of Deaf People. A Meskwaki advocate is opening doors. Plus, we learn the importance of Indigenous languages for generations to come. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from Indian Country today.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalahungva. A leading organization working to advance Native people in agriculture is helping food producers. The Native American Agriculture Fund announced this week they're awarding $14 million in grants to 54 different organizations. They're from tribal nations like the Walker River Paiute and the Swinomish tribes. The investment will ultimately impact 125,000 Native farmers, ranchers, fishers, and harvesters. In a statement, Tony Stanger McLaughlin, the organization's CEO, said, though through COVID-19, we have seen the essential need to build and invest in resilient food economies and enhance the work Native producers have been cultivating for generations. Our third round of funding is another step toward improving livelihoods, the land, and the health of our people. This is the third year the charitable organization has given money to Native farmers. The University of Arizona is partnering with tribes in that state to address the environmental challenges they face on their lands. Signs of climate change include increasing heat, wildfires, drought, and intense rainfall. The university is using its expertise in environmental research, renewable technologies, and agriculture to assist tribal nations. The partnership is especially important to Carletta Chief, who is leading the effort. She'll be working directly with tribes as the director of the university's new Indigenous Resilience Center. Chief says tribes will identify their priorities while Indigenous scientists lead the way and Native students are involved with the research.
I've been working with tribes already on climate change, on mining impacts, on drought, water management. And so through that work, I also attract many Indigenous students who want to pursue their masters and their PhDs in a way that gives back to their own communities.
Some of the projects include solar energy, water resources, and finding ways to adapt to climate change. The goal is to bring these technologies directly to tribal territories. A tribal nation on the East Coast is calling on Boston University to rename one of its buildings. The current name is Miles Standish Hall. Standish was a military leader. According to the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapoag, Standish committed extreme acts of violence against Native people. They're urging the university to rename the building Wituwamat Memorial Hall. According to the tribe, Standish killed Wituwamat and other members of the Massachusetts tribe. The movement to change the name comes as others are urging Massachusetts to redesign its state seal. It currently shows Standish's arm swinging a sword above the head of a Native person. Well, if you go into the Kansas City airport in the next year, you might see Indigenous art hanging in the waiting area before you board your next flight. Mona Cliff won a contest to create art for the airport.
There was a lot of applicants, and being chosen, out of all of those applicants, it really, is actually just kind of blowing my mind a little bit.
Cliff gives credit to her grandmother for teaching her the skills that have gone hand in hand with her artwork. Her piece is 20 feet long, and she will be using locally sourced wood and seed beads. And to be clear, the Kansas City airport is located in Missouri. In Minnesota's capital, Indigenous artists are coming together this weekend to showcase their talent. It's called Celestial Embodiment X Expanded Cinema and includes video projection with a live score, Indigenous dancing, live painting, and spoken word. This collective of artists is being brought together by Emmy-nominated filmmaker Missy Whiteman. The event is taking place in St. Paul to mark the final stages of Whiteman's mural, Celestial Embodiment. Her mural includes the work of her late father and legendary artist Ernest Whiteman. The filmmaker says the evening of performances is really a celebration of the artists that came together to work on the mural with her.
This event is really an interdisciplinary celebration of the artists that are involved, but also other Indigenous artists that maybe might not perform or paint in this type of environment.
The free event begins at 7 o'clock this Saturday, followed by performances and a Q&A with the artist and filmmaker. Whiteman says bring your own lawn chair and mask up if you plan to attend. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Tholahungva. Language connects Indigenous people to our heritage and our place on Turtle Island.
And a new museum in Oklahoma honors tribal nations. Stay tuned.
This is Indian Country Today.
It's International Week of the Deaf. Sarah Young Bear Brown joins us. She's a Meskwaki professional whose work aims to advance Native people. And she's also a prominent advocate who's deaf. We're joined by American Sign Language interpreter, Amber Braithwaite. Sarah, tell us about your role in state politics.
We actually just voted as the vice chair for the Iowa Democratic Party. And that is for going forward for 2022. It was a wonderful opportunity to be involved in the political world, to learn more as a deaf Indigenous woman, to be experiencing that intersectionality within the process as I grow, and the gains that we have been able to achieve for ourselves as an Indigenous community and as a deaf community, and having all of that come together in my ability to contribute to my society. It's been a very rich experience for me so far, and I've really enjoyed the traveling and meeting everyone as well.
Sarah, I understand you recently had an invitation from the White House.
They invited me to be a part of what they call the roundtable. And that is basically focused on Native Americans with disabilities, or the disabled Native American population. What kind of struggles are being faced? What kind of barriers are there in front of us or being placed before us? There were a lot of experiences that I had during my college years where I would, for example, I'd go to class and there would be no sign language interpreter, and trying to understand was a very big struggle for me. And I've been profoundly deaf since I was born. I've always communicated with American Sign Language, so it was a real struggle for me. And to be in class, not be able to understand, having that interpreter and that bridge, bridging the gap of communication for me has been a struggle. But that has been a struggle throughout my life, almost an everyday experience.
Tell me about your work in promoting awareness around missing and murdered Indigenous women.
In social media, what we're seeing is really not a lot of accurate information. We're not seeing a lot of provision of equal access to that communication, such as American Sign Language. And so what I did was I went ahead and took it upon myself to start offering vlogs. Those are video blogs, basically. I started with topics on MMIW. Basically what I wanted to do is I wanted to increase the education. Missing and murdered Indigenous women was a very large issue for our community. And there tends to be a lack of information within the deaf community. We don't have access to the same vicarious learning. And especially in the Indigenous community, there seems to be a lack of education. And so I decided to just go ahead and share the information that I had access to. And I used the social media platforms in order to do that. So I might include some protest information. I might discuss rallies. There might be, I did mention the Day of Awareness for MMIW, but there's been a variety of topics that I've been able to share education on.
What are some important conversations that we need to have with people who are Indigenous and deaf?
I realized in the deaf community, there's a lot of information that we don't know about, such as Native American history, our own Indigenous history. There were many of us that weren't even aware that other Native Americans existed. Even like our language, let me back up to that. Our sign language is based on Plains Indian Sign Language, PISL. And it is it is our connection to the soil. It's a part of who we are, and it's very sad that the deaf community does not have an identity that connects with that. And it's really important that we make more people aware of Plains Indian Sign Language and how it relates to American Sign Language, because we're able to see there's influence from PISL on ASL currently, but we have to bring those things to light. Now, with Native American community, they're not super focused on the ADA laws, disability rights. There wasn't enough focus for the deaf community to feel supported. And when I went to a Native American college, for example, as I mentioned earlier, there was no provision of a sign language interpreter. And I had to continuously ask for that interpreting services as I've gone forward working with the Native American community myself as a deaf woman. So it seems more lacking in information has been what's been the main problem. And so I've been spending my time educating. And I mean, there are two worlds. The intersectionality of that is it's overwhelming. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to put into one package and try to present that to the world and try to uplift and edify both communities. But I know that's not going to end. That's going to keep going. And I don't, well, at least until my term is done, but I don't know when that will be.
That was Sarah Young Bear Brown and American Sign Language interpreter Amber Braithwaite. The World Federation of the Deaf has many resources. We'll list that website at IndianCountryToday.com. Landback appears all over Indian country, and in Montana, it's more than just words. Amy Kruver from the Nature Conservancy explains. She's enrolled in the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska and tells us an important land transfer back to the Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribes.
It's an incredible, inspiring thing that I'm so grateful that I was able to be a part of. The story is very long. The initial purchase of the land that's located just off of the Flathead Lake on the Flathead Indian Reservation in Northwest Montana. It was purchased in 1989. And at the time, the Nature Conservancy in Montana was very focused on biodiversity. And since then, we've shifted more towards whole ecosystems. So we have this, 132 acres of land. And, I think from the beginning, there was always a hope that someday we could transfer it back to the tribes, the rightful stewards of this land. And we have a great staff here at TNC Montana, and in earnest started working about 2 years ago when I came on board on the land transfer. It's a big legal process and takes lots of folks, so many hands had a role in making sure that the transfer happens, both on our side as well as with the Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribes. So, it made sense for us for a lot of reasons. When you look at a map, the 132 acres is a perennial wetland marsh, and so it doesn't hold water year round, but is an incredibly important place for, they had a trumpeter swan reintroduction, the tribes did on this piece of property, as well as it's really important for upland and wetland bird species and many amphibians. And the property is bordered by 3 different sides of tribal land. So now the land will be in contiguous management from the Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribes.
How does Indigenous knowledge inform your work?
Just learning my language has taught me a lot about the different perspectives that Indigenous people have versus the English language, and teaches us also something about our relationship to land. There's a story that I heard from one of my aunties that my great-grandfather's Indian name was Ma-e-ma-ni, and Ma stands for earth. And when you translate it into English, it actually represents a tornado, which is conjures up a lot of destruction. But in our language, it actually means dirt walking on earth. And so it is a symbol of the relationship that the land has with the air and everything around itself. And so I think when I think about, how traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous ways of knowing are coming into the conversation, it's from so many different perspectives. It's listening to indigenous people about their stories of how their lands have been stewarded. It's trying to understand language. There's so many different place names here in Montana. We have places that are called have camas, and it might not have any camas there today, but because of that indigenous place name, we know that there was camas at some of these locations. And so it helps us better understand what we should be restoring those lands to. And a lot of that is coming from indigenous knowledge. But I would say it's most important that we allow it to come from them. And so these are deep partnerships that we have built with both the Blackfeet Nation and the Confederated Sedition Kootenai tribes here in Montana, to learn from them, to partner with them, and to better understand how we can help be allies in stewarding their lands.
What has been the tribe's reaction to the land transfer?
I met with the tribal council from the Confederated Sedition Kootenai tribe to get the authority to speak about the rematriation. And it was a great homecoming of a certain aspect, because I went to school on that reservation. So I have a degree of environmental science from Salish Kootenai College. And one of the current council members was actually one of my former teachers who taught federal Indian law. And, I think it's always a calculated conversation that tribes have about how local to be about these land transactions, because sometimes they can be of a great cultural importance that tribes don't want people to know about it or to talk about it. And during the council meeting, it was a resounding quote unquote, they wanted me to shout it from the mountaintops. This has been a priority of the tribes from the Flat Reservation to regain their lands. Of course, we know what colonization, what the Homesteading Act did to many reservations is it broke up their landmass. So it's been a priority of theirs to, ensure that they can have autonomy over their own lands. And so folks are pretty excited about it. I do believe it was the first rematriation of a gift to the Confederated Sedition Kootenai tribes. And from the TNC perspective, I also believe it was a first because we transferred it unencumbered, so it doesn't have a conservation easement on it, and it will be solely managed under the tribe's resolution and their current management plans that they have to really steward their own lands. And, I'm not sure what other tribal leaders are saying about it, but I do know, and I do hope that this inspires other conservation organizations to do the same, to work with tribes, and when it makes sense, to rematriate those lands back to the rightful stewards.
Thank you, Amy Kruver of the Nature Conservancy in Montana. When we come back, the First Americans Museum opens in Oklahoma. The First Americans Museum is now open in Oklahoma City. It's been decades in the making. Deputy Director Shoshana Wasserman has been key to its development. She joins us to talk about the themes in this new museum.
I think we're telling human stories. They are our native stories. They are all in first person voice. We are continuing a long-standing tradition of oral storytelling that is, something that we're known for in our many cultures. We pass down knowledge, we pass down histories from generation to generation. And one of the things that I am so proud of is that we continue that tradition and we allow for all of the different perspectives. Even on grand opening day with nearly 7,000 people that attended the opening, we're all going to remember that day differently. We were all gathered there together at the same time, even in the same locations at the same moments, but we will have different perspectives. And history is complex. And I think that's what this museum allows us to do, is remember those histories with the multi-dimensionality that is a part of our histories. We have 39 distinct nations, different cultural lifeways, different languages, different stories of originating here in this place that we now call Oklahoma, or the many, many removals to this place that we now call home. And so I think what I'm most proud of is the fact that all of those stories have room and a place to breathe and grow here in this place.
The complexity of stories is so amazing when you think about it. One of the challenges for any museum is you want Native people to see themselves, but you also want to see people from the larger community come away with a new appreciation. Those are very different missions. How do you make that happen?
Well, I think we did some things very strategically. So one of the things for all of our Native participants, there were, what we call Easter eggs in the museum field. There were all kinds of things in the museum that were nuances, that were evidence of authenticity, of cultural knowingness. We have an all-Native curatorial staff. So we really infused all of that knowingness into the museum, and Native people walked away understanding those nuances. Something as simple as and this is just a trite example, but in our museum store, in the youth and family section, as you leave that section, it says, "Until we meet again." It doesn't say goodbye, it doesn't say thank you. Many of us don't have words for goodbye in our native language. We have that expression of "until we see you again." And so there were things like that, all incorporated into by design into the experience.
That was Shoshana Wasserman from the Oklahoma City's First Americans Museum. Ingenuity is a series of short animations produced by Adrian Baker for PBS. He shares a piece called Tongues with us. It features Tom Phillips, Alfredo Didrikson, and Shauna Claw on the importance of Indigenous language.
To me, language is very important. Language is a definer of our culture, and our language is our culture. It's very important that the essence of the language, native languages in particular, need to be preserved because they're so expressive and they come from a very rich history, a time before contact, a time before calendars and clocks and existence of the modern world. As Indian people, we have become acculturated but not assimilated. We have not assimilated because we still operate from our value system. We still operate from that hard wiring that we have. Our cultural imperative is to understand where we came from and to be connected to that past and that part of us. The language offers that bridge between the past and today. So it's important that we keep that connection.
I know some Eskimo. I've learned some of my language because my grandma is Eskimo from Alaska. She lived in a really small village. Really, there's one school in the whole village. There's one post office in the whole village, and they're like the only two buildings that have running water. It seems to me like only the elders speak the language up there. It's the same how what happened on reservations, like another culture came there. It was the Lutheran church, and they were like, oh, you can't speak your language in school, you can't speak your language in church. They almost made it to where people were ashamed to speak their language, and I think because of that, there was a generation somewhere where they didn't teach their kids to speak.
If they offered Navajo as a language in an urban city, I think that would be an honor, actually. With technology, that's how our students relate to globalization. And they feel like the need to interact with kids abroad here in the States as well as internationally. But I think if they saw a program where a Diné language is being offered as a course of study like Spanish or French, I think that would perk their interest, because now we see some of them that are still a little bit ashamed to speak their language. And I think that started back when boarding schools were here on the reservation. For our generation and for those to come after, we have to preserve those teachings, whether it be written, be through a video, through YouTube, we have to preserve it.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. More news and updates, go to IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives, and have a great weekend. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand, just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. Standing
This is Indian Country Today.